Hello there. Today I'm here with Van Jensen, a writer you may know from his work on Green Lantern, The Flash, and James Bond. And now he's the mind behind the new comic run, Godzilla Heist, which is coming to trade paperback in early January 2026. Van, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So now, since we're here to talk about Godzilla Heist, I would like to know what was your personal relationship with Godzilla and the franchise before working on this book?
Yeah, so I'm certainly, never gonna claim to be a Godzilla completist. I was pretty young. I mean, probably, before I was 10 that I watched the original with my dad. I grew up in a movie theater family. This was a very small town, so the movie theater dated back to the silent film era. But then it had shut down in the 70s before I was born. But I grew up watching the old movies that had been in the theater way back. So the classic Godzilla was one of the ones that we watched, and I mean, I loved it. I was so taken by it. It was so much more interesting than basically all of the Western creature features, and just so much more nuance, so much more compelling character action going, so much more dramatic. So yeah, it was just this incredibly cool thing, as well as it's a giant a giant monster. Like it has that innate cool factor. And then over the years, I would watch some stuff here and there. I was like high school age when the 2000 Godzilla movie that was so terrible came out. Mainly, I just remember like the ridiculous soundtrack that it had, where like I think I owned the soundtrack, and it was like every song they overlaid Godzilla screams on the audio tracks. So you'd just be like listening to like Puff Daddy, and then everyone was just like Godzilla roar. And then yeah, I've watched the more recent Toho stuff, like a lot of the animated stuff, the more recent movies. So try to catch a good bit of it. But if you're gonna like start to quiz me on Godzilla lore, like I'm gonna start getting stuff wrong pretty quick.
Oh man, no. But with the book now, the heist, it's such a specific genre, which made it feel the right fit for someone like Godzilla. Did the concept begin with the human characters and the mechanics of the heist, or was Godzilla always the integral part of the story from the start?
So the very original thing was, I had done a book called Arca with IDW, and Jake Williams, the editor of the Godzilla line, was the assistant editor on Arca, and he took over the Godzilla line of books and asked me, "Hey, would you want to write some Godzilla something?" And I said, like I don't really have any ideas, but like, what about like a heist set in a Godzilla attack? And that was all that I really had, because I think there are some comics where Godzilla is like the protagonist, but you can't really characterize Godzilla. It's like Godzilla isn't emoting, right? So there's just not like, you can't really set up character stakes for Godzilla. So then it's tough to manage the tension. So I was thinking like, what's something that's very human level that can take place within a Godzilla story. And yeah, so it was truly, basically like Godzilla Heist was the pitch, and Jake immediately said, "Oh yeah, that's really cool. Let's do it." So from there, it became the work of, okay, who are the characters? What's the heist? What's the goal? How does Godzilla interplay in it? And trying to do that in a way where, hopefully in a satisfying way, you kind of progress from a very clean heist story to big kaiju battle at the end.
And since comics are a collaborative medium, what role did the editor, Jake Williams, play in shaping the story from the early ideas through the final run? And did his feedback ever take the story in a direction that you hadn't considered originally?
Jake's great. I mean, one of my favorite editors that I've worked with. So we were very collaborative. We were having phone conversations and hashing stuff out, and I was, coming up with some ideas, and he would add on. It was a very, it's a like you hear about improv that you want to say like yes and so it was that kind of, oh yes and what about this, and yes and what about this. Um, I think he steered a lot like the story arc. There's a big emotional story arc for the main character, and so Jake was a great resource on saying, okay, let's always touch back on that through line. Let's always keep that character journey, that emotional arc in the foreground, so that we don't lose that to all the action, you know, monster attack, all of that.
Many Godzilla stories position humanity as either victims of destruction or antagonists perpetuating the folly and carelessness of man. Where did you want the human cast in Godzilla Heist to fall on that spectrum?
Great question. So the main character, Jai, he's like second generation of a family that was victimized by Godzilla, a family that was in a city where there was a huge attack and devastation and people dying and all of that. And so he wasn't, I think most, like you said, most Godzilla stories, it's one or the other that people fall in those camps. And so what I want to do is look at sort of, well, for someone who has like 1 degree more distance from Godzilla, where would they go? So for the main character, he's really more interested in his family's legacy. And that's really what he's chasing after. And part of that legacy is, doing something to defeat Godzilla. But defeating Godzilla is really secondary to, and it's his mother who had worked to create something to be able to kill Godzilla, to restoring her to what he felt like was the esteem that she deserved.
Was there a point in the story that turned out to be much harder to execute than you initially expected?
Um, you know, Interestingly, heists are very complicated. There are all these movements. There's all kinds of stuff, and this is a heist that's set during a Godzilla attack in London. And the heist actually takes place in Whitechapel, which is the British Defense Ministry where they're located. So it's like the most secure place on Earth, right? And kind of the idea is like the only way you can get inside if it's during a Godzilla attack. So that was just incredibly complicated. But actually, the final issue we get to sort of a giant, monster battle, basically, which in my head it was like, oh, this is just going to be, just super easy, just beat, like almost like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, just beat them up. But actually, that last issue that was all one giant fight sequence was probably the hardest thing to write. Probably because I also want to make sure I was hitting the emotional beats within this huge fight.
What can you do with a heist comic that can't be done in, say, like a heist film? What advantages does the medium provide?
Yeah, I mean, comics are really cool in that, film gives you sort of information for all of your senses except for touch and smell, right? Like your sight, sound, you're getting this complete picture. And then, like a novel, prose, you're really having to take the words on the page and translate them into a visual. So comics are this great middle ground. And one of the cool things with comics is because you have panels, you can really like leave out, like you always have to leave out moments, because there's always like the moment that happened between the two panels. So that's something that you can play with, like what information do you leave out to sort of hide stuff from readers or keep them guessing. And then the other thing is just it's way easier to draw a giant crazy thing than it is to film a giant crazy thing. So it didn't cost $200 million to make this book. Where if it was a movie, that's probably what the budget would be.
Right, definitely. Since the story relies heavily on visual storytelling, how closely did you collaborate with Kelsey Ramsay throughout the process? And was there a moment that you intentionally pulled back on the dialogue to let the art do its heavy lifting?
Yeah, we collaborated really closely. Kelsey was great. Just such a good collaborator, such a good thinker. I mean, always coming up with new ideas. Which I look at as always the artist is the visual professional. They're going to have the best, most interesting approach to things. So I always want to leave space for that and encourage that. And also just asking her, it's like what's cool stuff that you want to draw? Because I'll you tell me, I'll put it in there. Um, and then, yeah, I think it was very, very smooth. Like a lot of it was like framing that she made interesting choices of kind of always keeping it a human point of view on Godzilla. So it's like your perspective is mostly on the ground looking up and Godzilla big towering over you rather than being like way zoomed out. So yeah, she nailed it.
Since Godzilla is a beloved IP, what creative flexibility did you have, and where did the limitations come into play? Like, say, with Mechagodzilla, or like with the human characters like Jai?
Toho was great. You have different experiences with different licensors. And some, I wrote for a lot of years for DC Comics, and sometimes you could do whatever you wanted, and sometimes you were really, really controlled. I mean, there were like the tiniest little things, like Mechagodzilla. They basically said like, hey, it should be one of these two versions of Mechagodzilla, so just make sure that you visually base it on this, and here's all the reference that you need. With Godzilla, uh there were two things I got caught on. One, I referred in passing to a script as Godzilla being green, and they were very quick to say Godzilla is not green. um, you know, Never refer to Godzilla as green.
Oh, wow, okay. Never knew that. That's crazy
Yeah,
because in the early Marvel runs, they made Godzilla green, so it's kind of interesting to see how much they shifted to like the charcoal gray, how they would like to make that as the stamp of the character, you know?
right, right. So, and I guess it was those old comics that were probably in my head as well.
Mm.
And then the other thing, I had one moment where Godzilla ate someone, but it was like not really clear that Godzilla had eaten someone, but it's like you get the picture. And I was told that I could not show Godzilla eating humans.
Okay.
So I don't know if Godzilla like doesn't eat humans or it's a matter of taste. I mean, we certainly have plenty of violence, but
Well, in -1, an early, like the earliest version of Godzilla in that movie, he did bite a few humans there in like the earliest
yeah.
scenes. So, maybe it's something different for comics, but that's very interesting to know.
Yeah, I had seen Godzilla -1 and I thought I was in the clear. But you live and learn.
So, if someone wants to break into comics, how important is the collaboration process compared to just pure writing skill?
The thing is, like, if you want to break into comics, the easiest way to do it is to be someone who can write and draw, because then you can do your own thing. If you can't write and draw, then collaboration is just everything. There's a couple of things I always tell people. One is, if you're a writer and you want to make comics, you should just start making your own comics. And even if you can only draw stick figures, you should still do it, because even that exercise of just drawing with stick figures, it's going to teach you all the stuff that will really make artists mad. Because there's just unintentionally, there's stuff that, like, if you aren't thinking visually, you're going to ask an artist to do stuff that's impossible, like having one panel where two separate things happen, like a guy takes his jacket off and lights a cigar and takes his hat off. Well, it's like, does this guy have six arms? You literally can't show that. So that's part of it. And then the other thing I always say is, when you write a comic book script, you have to think of it as you are writing a letter to the artist. And it's not like, hey, here's like some assembly guide to putting this thing together, like paint by numbers. It's here is my letter to you that's an opening sort of conversation about how to create something together and leave space for the artist to come back to you within that.
Going back to like your beginnings of writing, when did storytelling and writing first feel like something you wanted to pursue seriously?
It was really there from the beginning. I was like my mom still has drawings that I did where I was making my own little cartoons when I was like 3. So pretty much from the point that I could pick up a pencil. But then I grew up kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so I really didn't have access to the industry. So I went into journalism. I was a crime reporter. I was an editor. I freelanced for a lot of magazines, and then it was kind of a little bit later that I realized no, I really want to tell stories, tell fictional stories, and so that was when I started working on a novel, started working on comics, and then just kind of stubbornly kept after it since then.
So, how has your approach to writing changed as you've taken on projects such as like The Flash, Green Lantern, and now with Godzilla?
I mean, every project is kind of the same in some ways and different in some ways. I'm a big believer that storytelling and writing are different disciplines. If that makes sense. So storytelling is really kind of the same, from thing to thing to thing. Like there are ways that stories work and that they make sense, and there are things that don't really work in storytelling. And so, step one is always figuring out what's the story that I'm telling, how am I telling it, outlining, but really letting the characters be the leading voice of where the story goes, always having character choice dictate what happens in the action rather than, action dictating characters. And then writing, I mean, writing is very different thing to thing to thing. I write comics, I write novels, I write for TV. All of these things are totally different. And even like writing The Flash is completely different from writing Godzilla, just because the editors are different, the companies are different. What works for one character, sort of what fan bases expect, is different from one to the next. So yeah, but I think doing lots of stuff, I mean, I don't know, it keeps me engaged. Like I think I would get pretty bored pretty fast if I just wrote the same thing again and again and again.
How different is writing for like novels and comics? Is it because comics have like a already set universe, or is it because novels are all original? What is it?
Oh, the biggest thing is just when you write comic books, you're writing a script. So it's really, you're listing out. It's like, okay, page 1, panel 1, here's where we are, here's the characters, what they're doing, what they're saying, what's happening, the emotions, and you go through, and so you have to think visually, but it's really just I'm trying to describe, the stuff that I see and the stuff that's happening. And a ton of the work is actually sort of engineering, thinking about how much fits on each page and how does all of that keep a good flow, to allow, because you don't want to have a million panels to where the artist is drawing like such small detail. Like you want to have some big panels with giant Godzilla in it, right? Um, so that's kind of the challenge there. And then novel writing, it's both very freeing and kind of terrifying, where the worst comic script in the hands of the best artist is still going to make a pretty good comic, just because art is the thing that really makes comic books sing. Whereas when I'm writing a novel, I don't have anyone to cover my ass, so to speak. It's like either the words are good or they're not. So you have to put so much more thought into like making each paragraph its own little work of art. Being very deliberate with word choice, with literary devices, with all of it, of kind of setting your rules of how you want to write, and then abiding by them through the course of that project. The great thing about writing a novel is, comic books, the art takes a really long time. Movies and TV, it's like you write a script and it takes forever and ever for it to turn into something. But when you write a novel, you write the end, and it's done. That's it. I don't need anyone else to turn it into the thing, and it's already done.
What do you hope for longtime Godzilla fans or brand new readers to ultimately take away from your story of Godzilla Heist?
I mean, ultimately, I hope that anyone who comes upon it finds that they care about the characters and are caught in the character's journey. If they are, then great, and if they aren't, then I didn't do my job well enough. I'm not trying to like blow apart the Godzilla mythos or change anything or do anything crazy. I love Godzilla. I was really honored to get a chance to play in the sandbox, so to speak. And I hope that really, yeah, I just you know have left some little bit of legacy of people like like there was a heist story set in the universe of Godzilla that was really cool and like interesting. Like, if that's it, that's great.
Yeah, it's a very tangible franchise, and I'm really glad that you have become a part of this giant history of media.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a huge honor. Like, when I think about it, that I've gotten to do James Bond and Godzilla, like I put those above the superheroes that I've written.
What kind of James Bond novels did you create? Because I'm a huge James Bond fan as well.
Yeah, so I did graphic novel adaptations of the first two novels. So Casino Royale and Live and Let Die.
Ooh, fantastic. I'll have to check those out definitely. So, as we wrap things up, what can we expect more from you? What is there to come in the Van Jensen history of writing?
Yeah, so I have a novel coming out the same day as Godzilla Heist. So in January, it's called Godfall, and it might be tangentially related. It's about a giant alien that drops out of the sky and seems to be dead. And so it's this 3 mile long alien that falls next to a town in Nebraska, like little town in Nebraska. And then it's really about how the outside world descends on this small town, and the sheriff of that town, who just wanted to be like sheriff of his own little hometown, now has to deal with 100,000 outsiders and the military and cults and spies and all of that stuff. And then there's also a murderer loose in this town. So it's really like a murder mystery with this very kind of sci-fi kaiju backstop to it. So I'm really excited about that book. It's being adapted into a TV show with Ron Howard is attached to direct it, which is really
Congratulations.
thanks. And I'm an executive producer on that. And then I separately sold another original project to a studio for TV that I'm show running and producing. That can't say more than that right now. And then I'm writing two sequels to Godfall. So those are out from Grand Central, probably one a year over the next couple of years. And yeah, that's going to be plenty to keep me busy.
Where can our viewers and readers pre-order these?
Yeah, so everyone can find me at vanjensen.com, and I've got links there to where you can get the books. Let's see, I'm on Instagram at Van Jensen Author. But I think pretty much all of my stuff is available, wherever books are sold. I particularly always recommend bookshop.org, where you can order online, you can get great prices, and you are ordering from local independent bookshops.
Van, thank you so much for taking the time off of your day to join in this interview. Thank you guys for watching. And yeah, see you next time. Bye bye.
See ya. Thanks.